wholeness comes from the inside out.
When we're living congruently with our values, there's happiness because there is that sense of wholeness.
Wholeness is when the way of your being matches the truth of your being.
These next few podcasts are an attempt to talk a little bit about my theory of the mental, emotional, and spiritual bodies and how they communicate within the physical sensations we experience. I'm going to put a link in the podcast notes where you can experience a meditation and really get familiar and experience your mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual bodies. So be sure and check that out. It's free. In early 2021, I took each body and focused on it for the whole month in my video library at michellewingle.com/thrive-free. There's a lot more there, and you can access all of that for free. I'll put a link in the notes. And I've included a movie review for each body to help teach principles kind of in a fun way. So that's kind of fun, but spoiler alert. I wanted to have these ideas in place as I begin a new batch of podcasts based on different modalities within holistic or wellness practices. I have found the distinction between our mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical experiences to be useful in finding a modality that is right for you. The emotional body is a youthful energy. I think it's because it was our first state of being as babies. We were all emotions. We were not deciding or comparing things. We were simply sad, glad, mad, or asleep. Our emotional vocabulary needs to be expanded because our society has trained us to suppress emotion or to think of it as weakness, beginning with plugging our mouths as a young baby. Expressing every emotion may not be prudent in every situation, but it is important to feel every emotion. We use the physical sensations in the body and the thoughts in our minds to understand what's happening beneath the surface of our consciousness. The emotional body is the ruler over how we feel about our experience, and with a balanced mental body and a healthy physical body, our emotions can become more positive and peaceful. That's really the goal, because it's how you feel about things more than how they really are that affect our lives. The emotional body has two parts, like the mental body. For a minute, think about the idea of being happy or excited or thrilled. And when you feel into that, you begin to identify with things that make you feel that way. Or imagine you had to act these words out like you were playing charades or something. You might use large movements and expressions to kind of understand happiness and excitement. If you had to talk about being scared or angry or sad, your gestures may be small or close to the body, but they would express out. Emotions hold an expressive or extroverted energy, or they're action-based. They want you to move. Emotion means energy in motion. This is one part of the emotional body. The other side of the emotional body experience is what we call the state of being, or what I call states of being. In this place, we feel, but those feelings hold a kind of introverted energy maybe. If I act out things like peace, like I feel peace, or I feel calm, or I feel bliss, see how portraying these would kind of be a little different. These are more obscure, and I feel like they would be more of a state of being rather than a feeling, but still within the emotional body. The negative side, or degenerating states, would be things like feeling numb, checked out, anxious, or feeling shame. There's an amazing doctor named Dr. Janice Webb, and I was able to interview her here on the podcast. So if you get a chance, go listen to that episode. It's really good. She shares the science behind emotions, and it's her life mission to help those who are not given enough emotional support in their life. She talks about childhood emotional neglect and how that can impact our lives. They have found that not enough emotional support actually changes the way the brain develops. Emotions are vital to living in vitality. I have to stop and talk about trauma. I believe trauma flips the degenerating states on. I'm not entirely sure if we would have these degenerating emotional states without trauma. I don't know if we would numb. I don't know if we'd be anxious. I don't know if we would be checked out. Traumatic experiences are defined on an individual basis, and they create trauma in our body, which is the physiological part of us. That trauma is there. It's not a thought process. It's not a belief. It's not in our heads. It's not a psychological part of us. The trauma becomes physiological. So if we have a traumatic experience, our emotional body may move to a numb state or a hypervigilant state, and that's different from a mental process or a belief that's created by these traumatic events, as we talked about in the Mental Body podcast. When we live in these states too long, then depleting emotions like anger or shame may arise quicker than maybe they would when things show up that deserve those kind of feelings or that attract those kind of feelings. Overwhelm is a common state we experience because of trauma. If you are feeling overwhelmed and someone says, "How are you feeling?" Do you see how different that would be to describe? It's like you can't even just say it in one word. It's not quite an emotion, but it lives in this emotional part of us, our emotional body. Maybe that's why we're just resigned to answer, fine. If we understood trauma, we would not think to assume others could or should react to things the way that we do. There is also this unconscious belief within us that thinks we should only experience positive emotions and that we judge our lives based on positive emotions. This is not really a true thought, a true belief. One morning, I was asking and listening as I do, and I realized that I had felt joy every single day in my life during that period of time. And I would identify that period of time as one of the most difficult times. But I realized that every day I did smile, or I laughed, or I looked at the beauty in the world with awe, and I felt joy, even if it was just for a few minutes every day. So I realized that I was living a life of joy. I'm not able now to quite define this moment because it sounds like I'm just pulling myself together and saying, what's my problem? I feel joy every day. It wasn't that. I wasn't erasing all my difficulties, but it was different. It was like a relief because at the time it helped me realize that the difficult things were more about my judgment. I had just decided those counted where the joy did not. My anger, my grief, and my sorrow were more about believing they should not be there than paying attention to all that was going on in my life. So it shifted something, and I could start to believe in this joy. We are often unaware of the emotions we are experiencing for a couple of reasons. First, in order to recognize that we are feeling or thinking, we must first observe it, and most of the time, we might just be in the thick of it, so it's difficult. It's difficult to observe when you're just full on feeling it, and that's normal and that's human. This is why mindfulness is so important, because we build that muscle of being able to observe, just to simply observe, and also at the same time living our experience. We can do both. But in this way of living, when we can do this, when we can do both, we can live and observe at the same time. When we do this, our world moves into a kind of third dimension aliveness. It feels great. The second reason for being aware of our emotions is to become aware of the disconnection we have with our physical body. I know it sounds a little crazy woo-woo, but it's a real phenomenon. I have coached people with trauma, and they often remember the scene of their trauma from a bird's eye view or from a corner of the room, not in their body. I believe we actually separate from our bodies during some of these high stressful moments, or we may separate from our body internally, numbing out the body sensations, unable to get the messages that our body's trying to send us. The messages maybe were too painful at one point, so our system chose to disconnect in order to function. Like Dr. Webb says, when we do this, we have lost our most important guidance system. As a society, we have created a hierarchy of emotions. And it makes sense in a way because there are emotions that deplete our energy and vitality, and there are emotions that energize us and can even heal us mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. But think of it this way. If we filled our car with fuel or energy and then just kept filling it and filling it and filling it with fuel or energy, we wouldn't go anywhere. It's actually burning the fuel or depleting the fuel that gets us places. There's a quote that says, "Life's greatest lessons are usually learned at the worst times." And I think that may be true in a lot of cases. It's when we're burning our fuel that we're going places. It's when we're learning from difficult things. I heard Tom Brady speak about winning and losing, and he said, it was similar. He said that, of course, he loves to win, of course. But when you are winning, you are never looking at ways to improve. When you lose, he said, you ponder and you question every move, and you strive to be better. So you grow. Because of that losing or that negative thing, you grow. All of the emotions have value, and all of them are important and help us to grow if we stay observant of them. That's really important. We must actually experience them. We must feel them and be familiar with the sensations that belong to those emotions. The other day I was watching Confessions of a Shopaholic. It's one of my favorite little chick flicks. And at this moment of decision in the movie, the main character said, "I just have a feeling," she says, really emotionally. And her mom was there, and her mom says, "I get that feeling back here in the back of my neck." And her dad says, "I get it in my chest." We all experience sensations a little differently, but they are there. Messages we can use for guidance in our life. That's the emotional body's job, and we need the physical body to interpret it. Our emotions feel like the real us. It doesn't really matter what is true. It matters what we feel like is true. That's how powerful our emotions are, whether that's good or bad. This is what can unite us, and it is definitely what has been dividing us here in the U.S. There are 3 movies I actually want to talk about in this episode. One of these movies is a Disney movie, the second is a blockbuster, and the third is a documentary. The first movie I'd like to talk about is Disney's Inside Out. We've all seen it. We've all loved it. I don't know anybody that didn't love it. When we went to this theater for the first time, my family, at the end of the movie, all my kids turned their heads and looked at me and said, "This movie was made for you. You must have loved this movie," and they were right. My kids know me well. It spoke so much to me that I could have spent the whole time talking about this movie alone because I love it so much. It has so many messages, so watch it and maybe get those messages for yourself. But there's a few parts that were so tremendous at explaining our emotional body's journey in this life that I wanted to point those out for sure. The story takes place inside the mind of Riley, who is an 11-year-old girl. Her family is moving from one part of the country to another. In the introduction of the show, we see when Riley was born, and as she opens her eyes, she sees her mom's big smile, and she has her first emotion, joy. This is a pivotal lesson to learn. Joy becomes Riley's lead emotion. Joy is the boss of all the emotions inside Riley's mind. Side note, babies need food, they need warmth, and they need love and attention, and there is no hierarchy between these 3 needs. They are all equal. Learn more from Janice Webb. When I was raising my kids, we were taught at times to let our kids cry, let our babies learn to soothe themselves. If I could go back in time, I would do that differently. I would think differently. I would question that belief. We now know that in the first 2 years of life, babies need complete unconditional love, and they cannot be spoiled. They are not making decisions. They need this unconditional love for their brains to actually fully develop correctly. This is not learned development. It's literally like the brain developing physiologically and the nervous system. which creates an optimum balance of calm and panic when it's in this state. We need to have panic buttons, but we do not want panic to go any more than maybe, I don't even know, 50% of the time, but we do not want it to run any longer than it needs to run. We want calm to be our set point. And that comes from these early childhood experiences. So that smile from Riley's mom, developing joy as her default emotion, represents this experience. We have all the other emotions, sadness, disgust, fear, and anger. They all play supporting roles for Riley as well in the movie. But joy should be all of our lead emotions. And early childhood attachment is the key to this. And it's noteworthy to mention that in the movie, you notice Riley's mom's lead emotion is sadness, and her dad's lead emotion is anger. Kind of stereotypes. This is little and a subtle hint about these characters. And like I say, maybe stereotype, but that's something we should look at and maybe discover more about. It's kind of that little hint they throw in. So there's 3 points about this movie that teach really good concepts about the emotional body. This first one is a really fast scene, and you might have not even noticed it. I didn't notice it till I was watching it again for this podcast. But Joy's on the train, and she bumps into something, and a bunch of stuff falls out. It's like a game or something, a box. And she's quickly trying to clean up the mess. And there's like these cards or something that she's trying to organize. And she says something so profound. She says, "These facts and opinions look so similar," as she's trying to organize them, facts and opinions. And I love this. This was one of my first life lessons I had on my own healing journey. I had to learn and realize that there were way more opinions in the world than there are facts. And they look similar and may feel similar, but knowing the difference can make all the difference. Lots of things are simply opinions. Things may feel true, but even though they feel true, they're actually more of an opinion. Think about what opinions you accept as fact. I'm not enough, ... fill in the blank. This statement is only opinion. And many others in the world don't share that opinion. It's hard for us to kind of think that about ourselves. But other people have got other things on their mind. They don't have those opinions of you. Or things have to be a certain way is another thing that feels like a fact. Things need to be this way for me to feel this. That's an opinion. If you can break that open and shed some light in between those two things, fact versus opinion, it can make a big difference. And you can see how these kinds of inaccuracies can affect you when you put them in a category of a fact when they belong in opinion. The second thing is there's a scene where a character loses something special. And Joy, whose job it is to feel joy, simply tries to cheer up this character. She points out the silver lining. She tries to convince them that it's okay. She even dances and sings and kind of makes funny faces in order to pull this person out of their sad feelings or their grief. At this point in the movie, Joy is convinced that we are all supposed to just have joy, no matter what. But it's a poignant moment when the character's sadness comes in, and it's so beautiful. She sits down with the character, and she sits in grief with the character in pure empathy. She goes into the grief as opposed to trying to pull it out and get rid of it. The character soon takes a deep breath and is ready to go again. The grief has moved through them. There is place for all emotions, and it's important to sit with the sensations in your own body when you are around someone that might be suffering in some way. Many times, it is our own discomfort, and it was Joy's discomfort of grief that is why she did all that things. It was her own not wanting to be in grief, why she was trying to stop it in another person. And many times we're really trying to change our sensations and not theirs. So we need to be aware of that. And finally, the whole moral of the movie is that as we grow up, memories and experiences are a mix of emotions. the biggest lessons in my own life. Life is paradoxical. A full life requires all emotions. How does it feel to you to think about allowing all the emotions in? Think about that. Just let your body tell you how you feel about that. What does your body feel like? Does that idea make you want to pull back and reject it, or are you comfortable with it? That's an important question to ask yourself, and we all for sure prefer joy to sadness, but we cannot live without one or the other. The next movie, the blockbuster, is Runaway Bride. In this movie, Julia Roberts goes to the altar over and over again. She gets engaged, but the second she gets to the altar, she backs out and runs away numerous times. In the end, we actually learn that she has become emotionally fused to the man that she'd been engaged to. She would like the things they liked, and she didn't know her own needs or who she was. She didn't know her own desires. So many times we do this, and this actually is something that really pricks at my own heart. I actually struggle with codependency. It's called, terrible name. I talk about it a lot. Change that idea, but we're just going to call it codependence. And who knows whether this is a trauma response or a spiritual gift, this idea that I feel what others feel. And understanding my own needs and wants and my own feelings requires me to go into this manual operation. It's not something that comes naturally or automatically to me. I'm working on it, and I know I can heal from the wounds that maybe be contributing to this. I want to use this gift purely in a productive way and not just a protective way. But I admit sometimes I can feel that protection. I feel in my body that protection. Is there someone in your life that you emotionally fuse with? It's really easy to do. Are there people in your life you have a hard time expressing who you are confidently or easily? Think about that for a minute. These feelings are common. The last movie I want to talk about is the documentary called This Emotional Life. It's a PBS documentary. You can buy the entire season. I think it's 3 episodes for $1.99 on Amazon. It is worth it. It explores everything about emotions. And it starts out with the impact of relationships on our emotions and our emotions within relationships, why some lash out and why others shut down. It devotes a whole episode to the negative emotions of sadness, anger, and fear, and how too much as well as too little can actually endanger our health and our well-being. It also explores happiness, the what and the why and the how to achieve more happiness. 2 of the most interesting takeaways that I want to share with you today are, 1, that they really examine with scientific evidence this emotional part of us. They challenge the self-help industry, which picks at my heart a little bit, the holistic methods. But I liked it because it gave me a chance to hear another viewpoint, to question my own thoughts and beliefs about things. We now know even more from when they made this documentary that emotions can affect the body. We have the ACE score, and are learning more every day. I will talk more about the ACE study in a future podcast. It is a revolutionary hunk of data. So important. Changes everything about health and vitality. In the movie, they talk about a scientific study they did for years and years with a group of people that were connected in some way, and they measured their happiness. And they would just bring them in and they would ask them about their happiness. That's it. And they found that the impact of happiness was real and contagious. And I'll say it again, and contagious. They literally have the data that says that happiness of one person affected 4 degrees of separation. So a friend of a friend's sister has an impact on my happiness. Like, we are that connected. Your happiness boosts the happiness of others by up to 4 degrees of separation. There's a percentage that changes in each degree, but it has to be 4 levels before it doesn't affect their emotions anymore. It's true that we are connected. It's important to learn about emotions and how they affect each other and ourselves. We we invite you to the wholenessnetwork.com, where you'll find the Wholeness Library. Inside, you'll find tutorials, downloads, mini classes, and all sorts of streaming content for you on your wholeness journey.